Good afternoon. My name is Rhett Greenhagen. This talk is how someone with autism can specifically enhance the cybersecurity workforce. It's actually split off in three parts from three different perspectives. I was actually diagnosed with autism at age 14. Stacy's a doctor who specializes in autism and autism research. And Casey was actually my employee when I was working for the Department of Defense. So just a quick outline, because it's not technically going to be a panel. We're going to provide information as well as give different perspectives. So quickly we're going to discuss who we are, what our experiences are, and why you should listen to us. Then we're going to do a quick definition of what autism is, because it's so broad and a lot of people don't correctly understand the differences, specifically on the spectrum. Then we'll talk about the different research that's been done with people in autism, the pros, the cons, and then we'll talk about the study that we did, which helped fill in the gaps about hackers with autism, etc. Then we'll talk about management personnel on the spectrum from Casey, and talk about techniques and solutions for real-world scenarios with both of them. And then, due to the fact that we received close to 100 questions via LinkedIn and Facebook, other social media, we're going to do a large section of question and answers to be able to answer all your guys' questions, and there's mics in the podium, and mics on the podiums in the corners. So to start, I've worked in the Department of Defense, U.S. military intelligence, specifically in counterintelligence for 10 plus years. I was a primary forensic investigator at DoD's largest data center. Like I said earlier, I was diagnosed with autism at a very young age. Just quick, I practiced Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I started actually recently. And there's a large BJJ smackdown that actually happens. And there's a large amount of people in the security industry, specifically with autism, that actually do BJJ. And the other picture is my service handle.
I'm Casey Hurt. I have 20 plus years of IT experience, 15 plus as a manager, managing personnel on the spectrum, including Rhett here, for several years at the DoD data centers. Former chief of White House Information Assurance. I also managed a large DoD SOC, and currently I'm the technical director of 12 of the DoD's largest data centers.
And hi, so my name is Dr. Stacy Thayer. I have numerous degrees in psychology, but a PhD in industrial organizational psychology. So what that means is that my background in psychology really focuses on the workplace, managing workplace successes, and relationships in communication in the workplace. I've got numerous publications and have done research that really what my area of focus is employee engagement. How do you maximize employee success? And so this has to do with people with autism, people who want to focus on how do you integrate these people into the workplace and give them success to perform their job in the best way that they can possibly. I also have 10 plus experience working in the security industry in kind of numerous broad locations, but working specifically with people with autism and other behavioral challenges in the security industry. So that's the three of us. So the big question now, of course, what is autism? So we all want to get on the same page. A lot of people have, of course, heard of it, know somebody with it, maybe you have been diagnosed with it. But we want to make sure we're all on the same page about what it is. So Autism Spectrum Disorder, ASD, is considered developmental disability, and it's typically defined by behaviors. And a really important thing to know about this is it is a spectrum disorder. So what does that mean? It means basically that people can have this diagnosis and it will not look the same. You will not have two people that have the same similarities, the same behaviors, the same actions. There's themes, but you can have people who are very clearly high functioning and can hold down a job, and then you'll have people that cannot function, that need care, live in care, that can't socialize, can't communicate, and it's all the same disorder. So what do you do with that? And so there's no single proven, want to specify proven, known cause of autism. So the real focus here is going to be on your awareness of where you fall on that spectrum, where the people you know, care about, work with are, where you fall on that spectrum, so that you can increase your awareness, get that diagnosis. That's something we're going to be really focusing on, is specifically get the diagnosis to get the skills and the resources. And then so you get those services and supports to get your improved outcomes when you're trying to do something or engage in something. And then the general broad terms that you may have recognized if you know or work with somebody. So you notice a lot of it, people notice first, is usually the social cues, a lack of eye contact, maybe a lack of knowing distance and where to stand with somebody, being able to tell, is this an appropriate time to talk to somebody? Maybe they talk at you. A lot of social cues are usually the ones that are kind of foremost and present that you'll recognize in somebody who falls on the spectrum. Other times you may notice their narrow, intense focus. If maybe you work with somebody or you are somebody who's on the spectrum and somebody has tried to interrupt you and you're focusing on something, or there's sensory issues that are going on, that can be a huge challenge. So these are just kind of, again, some of the broad areas, the sensory issues and the social that you may have recognized. So it's kind of the general kind of high level, upper level things that you may have noticed. And then a few facts. So autism is now, it's affecting 1 in 59 children. It is something that often gets diagnosed usually in children, and it affects 1 in 37 males. Males are nearly 5 times more likely to be, now I say identified, I do actually want to specify that, identified as women to have autism. Okay, that's what the statistics are showing. Can get into that later, but that is something when you look at that, it is something that these figures are growing. ASD first got onto the DSM, kind of what you might know as like the kind of the psychology guidebook and big book of the psychology industry, but it only got on there in 1993, and it only started being recognized in as the high functioning area, or what you also may know as Asperger's, in 2003. Okay, that's not actually really a lot of time to watch these children, these adults, grow and become professionals and adults with these diagnoses. So we're trying to understand, what does it look like? We're recognizing it in children. They're more likely to recognize it in males. But what happens, what if you are a female? What if you are somebody that didn't get that diagnosis as a child? What does it look like as an adult? And so that's something we also kind of want to talk around too. There is no known cure for autism. It really is, there's skills and techniques that you want to manage to live with it, and especially if you're that high-functioning individual who can hold on a job, that you can manage and have success in the workplace and in your relationships. Really, statistic that only 14% of adults that have been diagnosed with ASD can hold down full paid time employment. So we're talking your full-time office environment, 14%. So there's a lot of qualitative research. So interviews, really, but no quantitative statistical data that is able to look and to see, of that 14%, where are they? Where are they working? What careers are appealing to these places that are enabling them for success? However, there's qualitative research and interviews that are indicating a high correlation between computer-related fields and, as we'll get into later, into cybersecurity, that people with autism that are on the spectrum that are high functioning or with Asperger's can really thrive, not only function, not only hold down a paid time employment, but thrive in these jobs. And how is it that we can set these people up for success to get these exceptional skills and utilize these individuals? So I will pass. Ooh, I went up. Sorry. I don't know. I've got to go
down. So everything she just talked about, giving the definition, giving a real-world example about how my mind works with autism. I run a large Facebook group, a social media group, that has about 50,000 people with autism in it. I see professionals in the craziest careers, from medical to technology, but it's always something very specific. One guy I met, he was fascinated with alarm systems. That's all he did. How they work, how the sensors work, how it detects moisture. Met people whose biggest thing was woodworking, the type of wood to use. And then some of my hacker friends, also diagnosed with autism, have something very specific. One's nonlinear equation applied mathematics. The other one is in DRC malware and how it operates. My thing is actually in link analysis. It's It's a behavioral model. It's how making connections out of noise. These are actually some of the graphs that I've done in my work. But when other people see noise, I see patterns. Not only can I see the pattern, but through successful management, I can show, because this, and this equals this. I can say, these nodes right here from these IP addresses, you should be looking at these. Yes, they're low on your alert status. Yes, they're not shown as critical, but I'm telling you, because this signature base has these two signatures, you should look at this group IP addresses because A, B, and C, right? So with link analysis, using visualizations, not only does it visually happen in my mind, but I can use applications such as Analyst Notebook, Palantir, and Gephi and show it to my management or the other intelligence operations and show you should be using this. And some of the work I've done is mostly in APT research, China and Russia. That's why I speak multiple languages. Some of the things I actually also work in with link analysis is machine learning. Writing algorithms that can help detect the patterns for people without autism, without people that see those patterns. But a lot of my research is usually closed source in some of the private groups like Yara, Crimeware, other names I won't recognize. But some of the work I've done was the Fitbit, showing around military bases, classified locations in Europe, as well as GCHQ. I was actually driven to the security industry by accident. I actually wanted to be a sushi chef. I wanted to be a sushi chef for the longest time. My parents said, absolutely not. I got in trouble with law enforcement at a young age. I was actually 14. And one thing led to another. My actually first job with the government when I was 18. Got my security clearance, my first security clearance, started working. I've been doing it ever since. But what drove me to computer security was the amount of problems that other people couldn't solve. Not on an egotistical basis, but I liked the solution that I see this problem, I can help benefit to society. I can help benefit other people that can't solve these problems. That's my way of giving back. But one of the biggest reasons of why computer security and specifically is it's constantly changing. There's, like I was mentioning earlier, how someone with autism has that one thing that they're really good at and they'll focus on. They'll go watch YouTube videos, read as much as they can. I'll go do stuff on Watson. The very next day, I find 10 more white papers that I didn't even heard of. Another YouTube video. And I keep on building on Watson, machine learning language, on new technologies, because it's constantly changing. There's no way I'm ever going to find out everything I possibly can about Watson, machine learning, nonlinear equations, specific types of malware, right? It's constantly changing. That's why I believe most hackers are specifically drawn to this industry. I actually helped with a study by the National Crime Agency when we were profiling foreign computer hackers. We come to find out, she'll talk about it later, that most of the cyber criminals that we were interrogating and working with based off their psychological profiles were diagnosed autistic or fell in the, I can't remember the name, like I said, she'll talk about it later, fell into the category of being on the spectrum. In talking about the benefits, which Casey will talk about later, one of the main reasons why I wanted to do this talk for so long was, I was working for a government contractor. I was in Israel speaking at a conference. I was doing something about skip tracing or something like that. And I was introduced by a guy after my talk from Unit 9900. This is a geospatial intelligence division of the Israeli Defense Forces. What they do is, if you're not familiar with the Israelis, in IDF, you have mandatory service, right? With autism, they were having a hard time finding jobs that people with autism could do. So one of the founders of this unit took him and the guy he was working with at this other intelligence agency to develop Unit 9900. They use autistic personalities to be able to notice patterns in geospatial images, from footprints to tank movement to the smallest things that anyone else could just possibly ignore. They see patterns in what other people see noise. I was doing a briefing, and I was listening to this guy talk, and he stutters just kind of like I do when I'm nervous. But the things he said, it made me want to bring it back to a large conference such as this to help people realize people with Asperger's that are high functioning and sometimes not as high functioning can do specific tasks to enforce this workforce. Not enforce this workforce, but to help this workforce. he was talking about noticing footprints in sand. What they did was they developed an algorithm to notice the footprints and then do another stationary image to see where on a road that IED was placed. And then the same image, he compared the image and look, there's footprints, sandals, the impression. He was noticing patterns. And that's actually one of the first use cases they actually had in this unit. My next bullet point, talking about an investigator profile. Investigator profile is a sense to where you do not want to stop working. You see a pattern that you recognize, and you just can't stop chasing it. You see a pattern in your mind, but you're gone so far out the scope that it's not even usable intelligence. One of the biggest problems with people with ASD is the controlling that investigator profile. Controlling to where a successful manager can say, dude, we need this piece. We don't need to follow this IP address to Kingdom Come. We don't need this. We need this specifically. But the thing is, I'm just so we're on the same page. I don't speak for people with autism. I'm speaking about my own personal and people I've met. It is extremely hard to not solve a puzzle. It is extremely hard. Like, I'm talking about like manic episode hard. It is extremely hard to give someone like me, my friends, or other people with autism a task and not let them finish to completion. Not because they want to say, my peer couldn't figure this out. They've been working on this for 2 weeks. I came here for 30 minutes and fixed it. It's specifically because that's the way that we feel that we're contributing. With all the negatives, such as social interaction, sensory stuff, we feel that, I shouldn't say we feel, but I feel like that is the only way that I can contribute to my team. If I didn't have this, I wouldn't have job security, I'll be honest. Like, no one's going to put up with my jokes and put up with my ignorance in the workplace. This is the only thing that I have to contribute to the cybersecurity workforce. And with a manager like Casey and the most amazing manager, if it wasn't for my managers, I wouldn't be standing here. I would not, there's no way. This whole person interaction would have never happened if I wouldn't have had good managers like I had. Having a manager know how to control the investigator profile and be able to say, this is what the team needs, Rhett, not this team. Right? That's one of the biggest things of being able to control. And falling down, some of the best jobs that I see people with autism or even on the spectrum whatsoever be successful at are suck jobs. I was talking to some friends, actually I just added this to the slide this morning. I was talking to some friends at a party 2 nights ago, and what I didn't realize was they're doing sock jobs. These are the most, one has a degree from Cal Berkeley, one has a degree from MIT, these guys spent their career going to school. But the biggest thing where they found success, not only personally but professionally, was being able to have large data sets, find little bitty things that everyone else is missing, and say, we need to be focused on this. And the other jobs, obviously counterintelligence, because it's just more patterns. That's why my main career was in counterintelligence. And signals intelligence jobs do the identifying patterns. Those are the three. So if I was to take the people that I know and consider friends and family that with autism, with actual diagnosis, they all work in those 3 jobs at some facet. I don't know any of them that do not work in those 3 job sections.
Okay, so I'm going to briefly go over some of the kind of the key upper level research. I mean, you can easily go on Google and look for research and studies, and you'll find a lot of it. So I'm going to kind of keep it to what we're talking about specifically. But there are, again, a lot of qualitative surveys and interviews with these cybersecurity professionals diagnosed with ASD, but talking to them and say, what is your experience like? What are your strengths and weaknesses? I mean, very similar to what Red has just shared, what his experience has been anecdotally. But it's all heavily theoretical. And each and every single one of these studies, as I was again going through them and kind of refreshing myself, would say, wouldn't it be great if we had a study that would be done to get a statistic of how many people in the security industry have Asperger's or autism? I agree. I would love for somebody to do that. I mean, again, now you're looking at, you need the resources, you need somebody who's going to be motivated behind this. But to me, it's an interesting thing that we keep coming back to as I'm reading these different surveys, and as I've done my work is, well, what is the percentage? If we go back to that 14%, of that 14%, wouldn't it be interesting to know? What if 10%, 2%, 3%? I mean, what would that mean to an industry that has these individuals with these unique skills that we can utilize. And it's a fine line. So this study that was done by the National Crime Agency, they looked at people that felt on the spectrum and found that it was much more prevalent, again, in cyber criminals. So they looked at sampling of cyber criminals and found that there was a very, very high rate of individuals who fell on the spectrum. And so we'll go into that a little bit when we talk about managing, because for some people, this can be as simple as you fall on the spectrum, you want to get involved in this, but that means what if that means going to an office? What if that means talking to other people? Or what if that means staying in your home, staying up all night and doing this research and doing this and getting this information, and again, using that for, say, black hacking versus white hacking. I mean, where are you going to be putting your energy in a way that you feel is the most rewarding? And so that's something that we also want to talk about and focus on is let's encourage these people to use their skills for good. So that it's not the cyber criminals, so that people that maybe fall on the spectrum and may not want to socialize, may not feel comfortable disclosing to a workplace, that these workplaces can create an environment that recognizes these skills and welcomes them. So we did our own study, again, very, very quick one, just to get a sampling of what we could find in the security industry. And we're thanking our big friend Jack Daniel. If you know him, he was a big help in kind of boosting our signal. So a big shout out to Jack Daniel for helping us get some people. So again, we're doing this exploratory study about what is your experience working in the security industry with Autism Spectrum Disorder. And so I'm going to kind of code through this a little bit quickly because we want to make sure that we have plenty of time for Q&A because, as Rhett said, there was a lot of questions that we got that we'll either identify or we certainly want to hear from you guys. So again, what are the biggest challenges that you are facing? So, see again, it's sensory, being in a work environment so let's say you're somebody who's real, Neil talked, Rhett and Casey will talk to this. I'm at the higher level, but they're talking kind of the ground level there. But you're seated next to a high traffic work area, and now people are talking, they're driving you crazy. And again, you're going to get the social, interacting with your peers. How do you connect to people in your management? And so again, that engagement, the organization, how are you organizing your work? How are you working with your managers? So I can pass it up to these guys to speak to more of the in the ground summaries of that.
So this question is, I think, the most important question because it interacts with anything and everything in the workplace. Your management, your peers, your software, everything. And the sensory is a biggest thing. I swear to God, I wish I could work in a skiff 24/7 and be left alone and just be no cell phone, no nothing. But being in a open environment with more than 10, 15 people, I can't get work done. There's no way. Even with noise canceling headphones, with people, there's absolutely no way. I actually had one job like 8 years ago working for a contractor. After 3 days, I had 2 panic attacks. And that's when I realized, maybe you should just work from home. And sensory is a huge thing. It's a huge thing. The dimness of the lights, the type of attitude in the office, how your peers operate, how your peers talk to you, how your peers communicate with you. And going to communication and going to these other pieces, especially social interaction. Social interaction, I'd say, would be the second biggest thing. There's been times at every job that there was at least one person in the workplace that just couldn't stand me. Couldn't stand that I can make eye contact or social cues or the small interactions. There was one person, at least in each job I've ever had, that just couldn't stand me. I've had multiple people at multiple jobs say, if you do not get rid of him, I'm quitting. And these are even jobs where I didn't even have interaction with these people. And then one of my biggest, that's not peer, it's what's the biggest mentor that I've ever had, he told me recently, he said, it's simply that they just can't stand the fact that you're better than them. And even 2 weeks later, and I'm still trying to chomp on that, because for me to have an ego like that and think that I'm better than someone, I'd have to say something to these people. I'd have to say, you've just been working on this for 2 weeks. I came in from the gym for 15 minutes and fixed your problem. And never rubbed in their face, and they still just couldn't stand it. Even communicating, even buying gifts, even trying to be nice, even trying to go as far as buying them birthday gifts, buying them doing anything, everything, because the social interaction part is how benefiting to a team. I have to have people, me specifically, the people I work with are like my family. Whenever someone says, don't take it personally, I'm like, are you serious? Like, that phrase doesn't make, that has never clicked in my mind. Whenever someone says, do not take it personally. Because everything I do in my job is me. My mental aptitude, my high IQ, my everything is how I help the team. And it's crazy. The social interaction is, it's crazy. And I'll probably never, I've had multiple therapists. I've had multiple amazing managers that have helped me go from as far as night and day from when I worked for Casey, and that was just a handful of years ago. But I don't feel like I'll ever have a proper social interaction with coworkers where they don't feel like they have to defend me to other coworkers, feel like they have to have a written guideline how to interact with Red. It's just, and the flip coin of that is telling your employees, well, you got to give this guy a break. It's not that.
Sorry.
It's not. Was that you need to shut up and move on? I think it was. It's the part of having an appropriate manager know when you should say give him a break, because I guarantee you I'll never make the same mistake twice when it comes to social interactions. I've done some extremely stupid things.
So I think that's an important point. Is as a manager, how do you give people the breaks they need without it looking like you're favoring that person so much? And that's a difficult balance to understand where people's strengths and weaknesses are. And that's what's very interesting about this study, is to see how self-aware a lot of people are. But when you sit down with a new employee that you think might be on the scale, they don't verbalize that to you. You have to baseline them like you do almost every other employee and really kind of fish that out yourself, where, having people get diagnosed and understand their strengths and weaknesses feeds into this a lot, instead of waiting for the first panic attack before I move an employee to an area where it isn't as high traffic, or making sure that you're there for the interactions with the people at your office that are a little more kind of hostile or right on that edge. So I think it's very important that people are self-aware and understand their strengths and weaknesses.
So how often do you feel your autism interferes with your ability to successfully perform your job? Brett spoke to that bit here, but really understanding at what level of awareness, how are these people feeling as they're working? How are they feeling challenged? How often does it come up? And so as you can see, occasionally to rarely. I was glad to see that the never was not the biggest one there. It does come up. Of course, Right, you've spoken to how often it's come up, what it's been like when it's come up for you, and Casey, how Casey's managed that.
Just so we're on the same page, I didn't do this study myself. These are studies.
Yes, I did the questions, we did the research.
If you look at the graph,
there's experiences.
There's 96.33% of everyone saying, I at least had something happen.
Yeah.
I've at least had autism or my diagnosis at one point in the study say something happened. I don't know. Maybe I don't know what it was. Maybe it was just one thing. But the percentage of where people said never is like this small.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll speak to it at greater detail later on, but this really points to how managers need to attempt to shift their focus and not make a person fit into a job, but identify strengths and weaknesses across the board and build your teams around those strengths and weaknesses instead of attempting to make someone shoehorn into something they're not fit to do.
Yeah. Has your autism ever caused you to be let go? So again, yes, unsure, and no. That would be one.
Yeah. So the unsure part is the one that actually kind of makes me laugh a little bit on this. That because as self-aware as most of the ASD employees I've had are, they sometimes don't understand how being on the spectrum definitely affects those interactions as much as you think they would. So I think it's pretty interesting to see that a large portion of people think that it didn't have any impact, where it most likely, unfortunately, did.
Yeah, so we wanted just to see what that, and if they were being let go, like getting a gauge of how accepting is it? How accepted do you feel in the security industry? Or have you been let go with your diagnosis? And then this one, and this is kind of one that's near and dear to my heart that I really wanted to understand is, how often do you experience bullying? Because considering how prevalent these social interactions and the challenges that you have socially, what is it like, and how are you experiencing your peers, and are you noticing it? Because the big thing that I focus on when I work with companies and when I work with people that are employed and working with autism or any kind of personality challenges is to really learn to say, the next time you say, oh, that person is so, oh, that person does this, to change that to your mind to why does that person do this? Why does that person why does that person make me feel uncomfortable? Why don't they understand I'm busy and I don't want to talk right now and they won't go away? Or, why? And is this bullying occurring in the workplace, and what you can do about it, especially as a manager?
I don't know how to do it as a manager. I don't know how you did it, but
How you experiencing it?
It's crazy. I mean, I'm a big boy. I can handle myself, but the amount of bullying. I mean, there's been some severe things happen, right? But either there were people who absolutely adored me. They even found the stupid crap I did hilarious and would talk jokes about it for years to come. And there was people who absolutely could not stand me, who would use homosexual slurs, who would use negative implications. Just completely, why are you here? Why are you here? No one wants you here. I've had some of the most nasty things said to me. But the thing is, what made it okay, actually I probably shouldn't say it made it okay, what made it livable was, it wasn't a huge percentage. I had more people standing up for me and realizing that I had shortcomings. And then after the argument, or after what happened, explain, dude, just ignore them. And I'm thinking, I'm going to be thinking about this for at least another month. But the amount of people who now are family, who would text me while it's happening and say, this has nothing to do with you, that has to do with their self-esteem, their ego, who would rather be wrong and not. I have a huge problem calling people out when they lie and when they're wrong. I have a huge problem with that. It's something I've been working on for a long time, but I'll never understand why people BS. Like, I'll understand joking, that's different. But I'll never understand whenever people BS for ego. There's a difference between BSing to protect yourself, protect your employee, right? But calling people out, that I see it as, if they tell something specifically, technically incorrect to another person just because they want to look smart, that person's going to continue believing that technical incorrect to where they make a mistake. Maybe they make a mistake and someone dies. Maybe they're in a mission-critical position to where they're having to do a forensic investigation to help protect a military unit. And because this person had this wrong aspect that someone had an ego over, that's a severe jump, but it's happened. Because people had too much of an ego to be able to, to where they'd rather no one notice they were wrong than be called out and say, you're wrong because of this. Here, let me show you what's wrong.
So I think this is also very interesting, because I think if you polled the non-autistic employees that worked with someone with ASD, they would also feel bullied as well. And it was interesting to see both sides of that from the people that came into my office, who felt like someone wasn't listening to what they're saying. And that goes a lot to the laser focus and that concentration that the ASD employee has, to where they don't comprehend things that aren't towards their end goal. And in casual conversation with people, that seems like you're being ignored. It feels like they're hounding you. But it's very easy to see how those interactions, without the social cues and the social interactions that generally occur in office conversations, can definitely lead to both parties feeling very unsatisfied with the conversation and both really feeling like they're being picked on.
Okay.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. All right. So as we just kind of spoke to, 50% of ASD employees feel like they've been bullied at the workplace. That's very important. Everyone should feel inclusive in their environments. Managers need to do a better job of keeping their finger on the pulse of what's happening within their teams. Any employee, regardless if they have ASD or not, should not ever feel like they're bullied in the workplace. But speaking personally from someone that came up into management, managers have a hard time letting go of the work that they used to do and really focusing on truly managing people and relationships. Because that's really, as managers, what we should be focusing on is the relationships and interactions between these personnel. So a lot of the ways I handled that with Rhett specifically was, number one, building trust with him. Number two, getting a smaller group within the team that he trusted, that he knew he could go to them and go interact with almost anyone in the office without having to worry about that interaction going wrong and everyone ended up in my office. So another point, so the building of teams from a management standpoint, and by no means am I an expert in management. I was a tech for years and came up into management really as a way to keep moving up in the organizations, which is part of the problem, unfortunately. But we build teams based off positions, and we want a person to fit a position regardless what their skill set is. So we do a lot to bend people towards the positions instead of shifting that paradigm and really learning how to build the team based off the functions that people can do and make sure that we put groups of people together that can complete the tasks instead of counting on 10 people all doing the exact same task. So we also need to really look closely at how we can modify the interview processes, especially coming from the Department of Defense. We have a very stringent interview process where you ask the same 3 questions, you can't elaborate, all kinds of fun stuff. That doesn't fit well with people with ASD. It needs to be more informal. It needs to be more them being able to kind of show you what their skill set is, as opposed to you asking questions about what are your top 3 strengths and weaknesses. All the typical interview questions that come along with a standard office job. So this also shows the dynamics of arguments between ASD employees and their peers. So if you look at just the example that Rhett and I kind of shared, the lack of the social cues and that laser focus on them only wanting to get to their answer, and they can't let anything other than getting to that answer go, that really doesn't fit when you have mixed teams or even an investigation team that's working with sysadmins. Of course, the sysadmin never thinks they're wrong. The investigator always thinks they're wrong. So, it really is working through how you can get that feedback to the ASD employee without having to burden them with going and having the personal interactions every time. And that's where what we did in my team was we built teams around that to where Rhett would go and do the initial analysis. He would find the things that other people couldn't see in significantly shorter time. Then he would pass that on to someone who would triage it and do the remainder of the work, coming back to Rhett if we needed further clarification. So what are some of the skills and the advantages of having an ASD employee? They're definitely detail-oriented and laser-focused. So that goes a lot into being able to take a very large set of data. And we always hear about the signal and the noise. From an outside perspective, I don't believe people with ASD see noise. I think they see 6,000 signals. And it's very interesting to see how they can link some of these things that a traditional analyst would put aside as noise and tie them back into the core signal and discover things we wouldn't have seen otherwise. I put out-of-the-box thinkers, and I put out-of-the-box in quotes because I personally don't believe ASD employees have a box. I think they start with abstract. So, and we can see that throughout history, too. Some of the greatest inventions have come from people that were most likely autistic because they don't start with a known, they start with a problem. And they work to solve that problem regardless what the solution is. Instead of, trying to make a car better, they try to make transportation better. The ability to spot patterns others would likely not see. That really goes into their ability to look at those signals much faster than I've ever been able to see a person do it. Really almost to the point of machine learning and spot things that we wouldn't have seen otherwise. And in my personal experience with about the 7 or 8 employees I've had, I've seen 80% or higher efficiency on tasks like that, and really taking a massive, 1 to 2 gig log file that's pure text and being able to identify things in 20 to 30 minutes that a group of analysts would have churned on for probably over a week. So while from a manager standpoint, it can definitely take more to manage an ASD employee, the output you can get if you do it correctly is definitely worth the extra cycles. Definitely, ASD employees have keen memory and an uncanny ability to put that knowledge to use. I can't tell you how many times Rhett has quoted things out of books that I would have never thought to think about looking at for answers, even if it's not related to directly what he's doing. So it's like a walking encyclopedia a lot of times that really has helped me out when we're trying to work through problems, even if it's not related to directly what he was working on. So,
Oh, yeah. 10 minutes left. That's 10 minutes left.
So we're going to go and open up the questions and answers, Q&A. There's microphones on both sides. You guys have questions?
Hi. I have a question regarding do you have any advice for people who may be partially on the spectrum who are being moved into managerial roles? If there's any kind of guidance that you can provide for folks who are forced to transition from working in their niche where they're comfortable towards more social interaction?
It would all depend, and just like Stacy kind of pointed out, the spectrum is very wide, of course, and it differs depending on, each person has different levels of where they handle social interaction and things like that. I would think if someone is being pushed that way, they would see, the people pushing them would definitely see a value in doing that and think that that person's ready. The biggest thing is make sure the person has a mentor. The mentor understands the complete situation. If they're on the spectrum, getting diagnosed and making sure you understand clearly the strengths and weaknesses you have is critical to that, and be open with your mentor and make sure they understand it and can kind of help you work through that. But mentorship and someone you trust, I think, is the core to that, regardless if you're like going into management or even just a normal analyst. Building that trust relationship with your management is critical.
And again, just put that real quick again. We really do want to stress of getting the diagnosis, getting to understand your strengths and weaknesses. That is one of the key takeaways that we also want to express is for individuals who are diagnosed with it, get as much information as you can. Get it from anybody. It's your choice to disclose to your employer, but get the information. Look online. Go to centers. Get resources so you know, okay, I'm going to go in this manager role. Maybe I don't always express things clearly, but here's how I can compensate and support. Support yourself. Get and work with your strengths and weaknesses. We all have strengths and weaknesses that we have to compensate for. On the spectrum, if you think you're the best manager in the world, you still have something that you need help with. And so exactly the same thing of know your strengths and weaknesses to work with and get you support.
I've led twice. I led at HP Government Services. I led investigations, and then I was doing leading before. One of the biggest issues I had were the people stuff, the type of questions I can ask in interviews. Because I feel like everyone else got a handbook for life about the stupid questions you can't ask, the silly things that everyone else thinks silly. But I never had that real life experience to where someone corrected me and corrected the behavior. When it came to leading individuals, I would say don't micromanage too hard, even though you're going to want to. For me, communication, if I don't have someone communicating with me what they're doing, exactly what they're doing, it's not a major issue, but I see a huge piece of where people come together.
So we're running low on time, so we want to take one question, and we are available after the session to take as many questions and answers as
This one's really simple. Is your study published, and if so, where can we find it?
So it's in our white paper right now.
I'm sorry, in your what?
The white paper that we're submitting, so it will be
It will be posted on Black Hat.
And this was really what we wanted to do, is we kept it as an exploratory study that we're going to build upon, most definitely. So.
We've got time for one more question.
Yeah, maybe one more question if there's. Yeah, wait, so I'm running to the.
Mine's easy too. My background is deep in psych, and I'm just curious about diagnostic procedures or tests that are available for adults that might have been missed as kids, because from what I've seen, there's not a lot. Do you know
There's
if
not. There's not. There's actually no official test right now that you can give to an adult that will officially diagnose them the way it is in children. It is qualitative research based on interviews. You can go to centers. What they will do is that they look at it very holistically. They will give you the opportunity to talk to your family, friends, coworkers, so they can get as much information about you as the individual. That is, again, we keep harping on that. Know yourself. The spectrum is huge. Know yourself and get as much information as you can from there are professionals who will give you that information as an adult, even if it's not the same resources as there are that are diagnostic in children. How we doing? 2 more minutes. Okay, we can do one more.
I'll ask one.
Okay.
So, as a manager, besides being an approachable person, how can you have someone with ASD feel comfortable to tell you about them so you can help work with them?
Yeah, that really, once again, comes back to trust. I mean, and you have to do that with all your employees, right? It's not just the ASD employees. It's being available, and I mean, Rhett can tell you, when I was a manager, I was available to my employees literally 24/7. My life, my family is important, but my employees are part of my family as well. So what's going on in their lives is very important to me as well. So I think, building that trust helps them feel comfortable coming out and telling you information like that they have ASD, and that they kind of give you a roadmap to how you can help them to some degree, and then you help modify that roadmap by working with them and looking at how those interactions play out.
And you can get support. I mean, use HR if you feel comfortable enough. If you don't feel strength, and maybe you have an organizational development person on your HR team or someone that you can say, can I get your support? You don't have to involve the individual, but can I get your support managing somebody that may have some behavioral issues that may be a challenge? Help me navigate it. Get help.
The best thing I ever did in my career was tell Casey I was diagnosed autistic. Mm-hmm. That was the best thing, because by then I'd already worked at NSA once. I worked at Defense Intelligence Agency. I worked at the Army, the Air Force, and I never told anyone. I kept on getting fired. Was the thing, right? And I started to think, I'm covered by ADA. I'm covered by all these legal protections. I told Casey actually already knew, but
yeah.
But it's kind of obvious. You see a socially retarded person sitting there with 4 screens, doesn't want to be talked to, doesn't want to be touched.
So I was lucky enough to.
Yeah.
My wife is a special ed teacher and has been for 17 years. So, it was easier for me probably to.
If it wasn't telling my employer, this would have never happened. I would have never been as successful in my career as I've been. I would have never been one of the best in the world at what I do. I would have never. There's so many things I would never be able to do if I wouldn't have done it.
So we're out of time.
Yep.
We're going to get the hook. Thank you all for
everyone.
attending this presentation. We really appreciate your time.